Hey everybody! In today's video, I am going to do a no-line masked watercolor using some add-ons from the July Hero Arts kit. To begin with, I am using some ink on 3 fade out ink. You know, this is my favorite no-line watercolor ink. And I'm stamping this little goat onto some Fabriano cold press watercolor paper. Also my favorite. I am super predictable like that. And I'm using my Daniel Smith watercolors. I have 2 splits from my watercolor split group set up in a single palette. What I do when I get these palettes is I remove the insert and I use museum putty to hold the half pans into the palette. Museum putty is that sticky stuff that doesn't hurt your walls when you put it behind a picture to keep it straight. And that way I can get 2 of the splits into one palette. Each of my watercolor splits has between 20 and 30 colors in it. I have one split that's really large, the iridescent split. If you want more information on splitting watercolors to save money, you can search Daniel Smith Watercolor Split Group on Facebook and you can join our group. Please answer the questions that I ask that are required for group membership. That seems to be something people feel like is optional, but it's not. Now, on this goat, I've put down a base color, and then I'm going back with sepia, which is kind of my favorite neutral dark brown. And I'm doing little flicking strokes to give him sort of a fur look on his back and a little bit on his head. And then I'm also shading him with the sepia. It's funny, the sepia Daniel Smith, to me, isn't what I think of as sepia. I think of sepia as a warm vintage brown. And this is really quite a neutral brown to me. But whatever, I love Daniel Smith. He can call sky blue sepia and I would believe him. So there's that. My brush is the Escoda Versatile Travel Brush, which I love. It's the number 2, which is kind of my favorite brush to paint with just because I can get this little detail like fur. It holds a point really well. And I tend to paint very small anyway when I'm not doing my watercolor challenge, which actually started yesterday. And I'm working in my sketchbook there, so I tend to use bigger brushes there for larger images, which intimidate me, I'm not going to lie. Now, I've already stamped and cut out masks for each of the animals in this set, and I'm going to mask the goat, and you're going to see a series of disasters unfold here, and that's okay. That's what can happen with masking. Masking forces you to think backwards, and that's something I'm not really good at. So you'll see what happens as this goes on. But I'm stamping the hay bale image over the masked goat so that it looks like he's standing on the hay bale. And so far it works, right? So far you're with me. Just wait. So what I love about this ink is when you're using a classic watercolor pigment, the pigment actually grabs the ink lines and makes them more prominent while you're painting, which is magical and perfect for no-line watercolor. So it allows me to retain the detail on the hay bale and kind of see where the little bands that hold the hay bale together are, while I put in some of this detail of the actual hay with Aussie red gold one of my fave colors. So I have burnt sienna light, raw sienna light for the hay bale. And then Aussie red gold for the little pieces of hay that are sticking out. And then sepia for the little bands. And I soften those lines out to just make them look like they're set back a little bit. Now, the first disaster that happened was I thought that I hit record when I was masking and stamping the pig, the bunny, and the goose. And I didn't. So imagine my surprise when I've already painted the whole dang pig and I look up and there's no red button on my phone. Imagine my surprise. So I said some unladylike words and then I hit record. And sorry, you can see my headphones here because I'm listening to a podcast while I paint. That's what I do. Anyway, I masked the hay bale and stamped the pig. I masked the hay bale and stamped the bunny. And then I masked the bunny and stamped the goose. So that's what you missed. However, what you also missed while I stamped the hay bale and the goat is that suddenly physics has stopped working in this little scene. And some things are kind of floating over on the right-hand side, and I'm going to have to fix that. So I'm starting to fix it on the left-hand side where the bunny is sort of falling off the face of the earth and the pig is floating. So magically gravity isn't working on one side and it's working on the other side. I don't know. It's stamping. I'm not going to get too wound up about it. But it is bothering me, so I am going to have to fix it a little bit later. I'm using sepia again as the grounding element for these images. Just sort of going around the bottom of the images and then fading it out a little bit towards the bottom of the page. No need to paint in a bunch of detail there. I mean, I've already spent an hour on this, half of which you couldn't see. But it is what it is. So just a little bit of something to anchor the parts of this where gravity is working. And then I'm going to work on the pig, and that's where I'm like, ooh, this doesn't make any sense. The bottom of the hay bale is like floating up around the pig's belly. How does that kind of a thing even happen if we're not in some sort of Harry Potter book? I don't know. But you can do all things with watercolor, so never fear. I'm ignoring it for now, and I'm working on the bunny's ear. Then I'm like, whoa, I see what's happening. So I'll add a little shadow. I mean, it's clear that the goose is behind the bunny, but you do need to add shading just to really indicate their position in regard to each other. So here's where I fix the gravity. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the hay a little bit darker because I now see that I have to cover up like half of this pig. And in order to do that, I have to overcome that pink and his little hoof. So I'm extending the wrapping of the bale down a little bit. And then I'm actually adding some sepia shading to the hay bale to extend that back side of it down in front of the pig's leg and actually make it look like it's connected to the earth and not some sort of magic carpet made out of hay. So you can fix anything with watercolor. Don't believe anybody who tells you you can't. Plus, it's just a card. Party animals. So here are some other cards from the release that accompanies the awesome Country Fair Hero Arts July kit. These are all right up my alley. And I have details on all of these adorable cards on my blog, but they're all themed to be things that you would see at a state or county fair. And so they're super fun and you can use them all year. So I hope you come over to my blog and check it out. And I hope you have a great week. Thanks so much for watching.